Tag TV and Tag Radio. Be seen and heard by both technology users and technology producers throughout the state of Georgia and around the world. Low cost, big benefits, powerhouse online branded video and audio has arrived. Tag TV, Tag Radio, there's a lot more to know. This edition of Tech Talk is brought to you by GlobalSpeak.com, new media consultants, corporate video and audio communications, video and audio production and distribution, live and virtual event production. Tag TV and Tag Radio is a service of GlobalSpeak.com, creatively delivering powerful marketing, video, and audio solutions. Raising awareness on political activity relevant to the technology industry. The advocate for Georgia's technology community, committed to working with our federal, state, and local elected officials. It's all about promoting sound policies to enhance the industry's growth and Georgia's overall economy. TAG's Government Relations Task Force. Greetings, everyone. It's Friday, April 20th, 2012, and this is a special 2012 Georgia General Assembly wrap-up report edition of Tech Talk with Technology Association of Georgia President Tino Mantella. I'm your guest host, Frank Baia. Late last month, the General Assembly closed out this year's session, covering everything from a change to the highly successful entertainment tax credit to a repeal on a ban of personal technology devices being used in Georgia classrooms. Tax reform, the creation or not of charter schools, the continuation of the Science and Technology Commission, and more, much more technology-related bills impacted this year's General Assembly actions and activities. Up to the Assembly wrap-up edition of Tech Talk, Brandon Hembree, partner at Massey, Bowers & Hembree, and chairman of TAG's Government Relations Task Force. Recognized for the 8th year in a row as one of the top major lobbying firms in Georgia, Massey, Bowers & Hembree has and continues to be selected for this honor by business and political leaders from across the state. Brandon's stellar career spans legislative positions with Ford Motor Company, where he researched and monitored business and manufacturing legislation for 8 states throughout the Southeast. He also coordinated state, federal, and local grassroots initiatives, political activity committees, and local business development project relations for the Hapsville Assembly Plant. Later, Brandon served with the Georgia Department of Administration Services Government Relations Manager prior to the formation of the Georgia Technology Authority. He was the IT account manager for political sensitive agencies. He joined the Massey Bowers firm in 2004 and is today one of the firm's partners. Don't know what happened under the dome this year? Go inside the Assembly for all the actions and reactions to the technology legislation performed and impacted this year. We wrap it all up in this issue with leading political consultant and respected legislative, political, and government relations top executive Brandon Hembree. Brandon, welcome to Tech Talk.
Frank, I'm glad to be on the call with you.
I know that the season comes to a close at the end of March, and now I'm guessing that there's a lot of follow-through and follow-up that needs to be done, but certainly it was a challenging assembly, but a really good one for the technology sector. Tell us a little bit in specifics about that industry and what happened during the session.
Okay, well, I'll be happy to. Well, like you said, the session has ended. It ended 2 weeks ago, actually. It ended on March the 29th. And we are waiting for the governor to take action on the bills that have passed, and we expect him to be completed with that process probably the next several weeks or so. And all of us are in the technology community are kind of anxiously awaiting him to sign several pieces that we promoted as a community and were able to be successful on. The biggest one, and I'm really happy to say this, is that, as you know, Frank, for many years, the technology community has pushed for our public pensions to be able to invest in alternative assets. And
absolutely,
this is a kind of a big issue for the startup technology community in Georgia because there's really been a lack of capital available to them for many years. And that bill finally passed. It was Senate Bill 402. And I literally think the technology community has been working on that for 10-plus years. So it was a very good victory to get that through. And this governor was actually behind the bill, so we expect him to sign it. actually we expect him to do a kind of a formal bill signing ceremony in order to kind of showcase the fact that passed. So that was our number one victory, and again, I think it's clearly a victory that's been long coming. So we should all celebrate the fact that bill actually made it through.
And I think celebrate's kind of a key word in the sense of the entire state can celebrate. I can't remember a time, as of late, TAG has been really aggressively moving on a statewide expansion, opening up chapters in Augusta and Savannah and Macon, and looking at some other locations. And partly because of the things that we do, like Tech Talk, we have an opportunity to speak to several of those locations, and even have had the opportunity to talk to Sandy Springs and even Alpharetta. And I can't remember ever a time when the local governments and the chambers and the private sector have ever been so excited about incubators, about startup companies, and about, grow your own kind of economics. And I'm sure that this is part of that momentum, and certainly will add to it if and once the governor signs it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I should add that this legislative victory was actually a partnership between the technology community and several economic development entities, including the Metro Chamber of Commerce and the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. And
I'd be remiss not mentioning Invest Atlanta and the Metro as far as the efforts that they put on. Certainly the state and the Georgia Chamber as well. I'm just commenting. They have been, as you pointed out, I think, involved in the battle for many, many, many years. I'd just say again that some of these outreaches outside the traditional perimeter, and often talked about even two Georgias,
right,
I think is obviously antiquated and just no longer a reality.
You're right. So that was a great victory for the technology community, and another great victory was on the digital learning front. And I think I talked about this on our last radio interview. There was a bill, Senate Bill 289, that was introduced that moves the state forward from a K through 12 perspective and creating opportunities for students to become more engaged in technology from an online learning perspective. And that bill passed with the support of the technology community and the K through 12 community. And once the governor signs that into law, it's going to open up a tremendous amount of opportunity for students, particularly in rural parts of the state, to be able to get access to online learning and hopefully the technology that they're going to need to be able to move forward with employment after they graduate from high school or college or whatever level of education they may achieve. But that was another good victory for the technology community.
Well, and again, as part of that whole, often now we use redundant words to describe same things, ecosystems and that kind of thing. Where I'm headed is that I know when you mention rural Georgia, you got to think about the North Georgia Network and what they've done with fiber optics up there, and the push that Georgia College has in terms of using distance learning and taking advantage of some of the technology that the infrastructure will provide for them, even the prospect of even collaborating with, I think, colleges out of Gainesville. So I'm sure that's going to also, again, not only support the evolution, but continue to be a catalyst in helping that outreach to occur.
That's correct. That's absolutely correct. And in addition, probably from a third-tier perspective, we did significant tax reform this year. And one of the issues that has been very important to the technology community is the film and entertainment tax credit that's available. And that has really contributed to the growth of that community here in Georgia. A bill went through. There was some concern that the General Assembly was going to completely eliminate that tax credit. In the end, they compromised, and I think what came out was a good bill that addresses some of the abuses of the tax credit, but still allows those companies that are here and viable and that are truly contributing towards economic development here in the state to benefit from that tax credit. So the technology, that was more kind of a defensive move on the technology community, but we were able to preserve that tax credit that's already out there.
That's tremendously important. I think a lot of our listeners know and appreciate the expansion that's gone in the pure film production area of that particular industry. But a lot of people don't realize the outreach that it has for other technologies, including even data storage and digital distribution and so many other aspects to it that have what we'll call layers and tentacles. Could you maybe just touch, I think our listeners would be interested in what, maybe not too granular, but the kinds of things that might have been taken off? When you say the bad aspects of it, what would be some of the examples of that?
Well, sure, there were, and when the legislation was originally written, I mean, like any legislation, you don't always know the unintended consequences. And so that's why sometimes it's necessary to go back after several years to see how the programs have worked that you put in place legislatively, and to tweak those programs. And essentially, what was happening is there were a number of companies that were utilizing the tax credits in an inappropriate manner, and that the original intent of the General Assembly was for this to have an economic development component.
Sure.
And I think some companies were utilizing this from an ongoing business perspective versus truly kind of create a growth in this type of industry here in Georgia. And that's the thing that the General Assembly went back and tried to correct. And like I said, it doesn't have a negative impact on the. In fact, I think in the long term, from a viability perspective, and just from the perspective of knowing that the program is working, I think the tweaks are going to help serve it long term. Yeah.
Well, and I'm glad you took the moment to explain it that way, because certainly I can appreciate the unintended consequences, and when you're dealing with something that really has no precedent or very little precedent to deal in. The other side of it is, thank goodness, because of your efforts and the efforts of a lot of the technology industry and other professionals that are involved in helping to educate and explore these issues, we didn't lose the entire thing because of some of the unintended consequences. So I think our listeners, I certainly get it, and I'm glad to hear about that, because I know that so many of the people that we do business with here and others that something has trickled down as crazy as it sounds. Brandon, I'm an antique collector, and I've dealt with dealers all over the state that have been impacted by purchases that had never been made before by some of the production facilities that were looking for staging. So it's amazing the trickle-down aspect of it, all the way through the technology aspect, even down to retailing,
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And I will say it took a tremendous amount of effort from the digital entertainment community to educate the General Assembly about those trickle-down impacts. And I think few people realized how deep that really goes.
Well, and again, I think it's also a case where the employment aspect, a lot of people, I think, have a tendency to think that it's temporary, or that it's in the moment as something gets produced and then moves along and gets distributed, and then all of a sudden there's nothing there. I've never seen more video production crews, more technology, even rentals and locations, post-production operations, investments in studios. So that whole situation, again, from one level, has certainly been impactful. On another level, again, as I mentioned earlier, about data centers and digital distribution, and even spills over into broadcast and gaming, because a lot of these technologies are impacted by the same kinds of cloud technologies and digital aspects that are impacting even traditional business, if you can call it business traditional anymore.
That's right. You're well made point there.
So again, it was a good time for the technology community. Do we move forward? Anything else more that our listeners need to know about?
Well, over the summer, we're going to continue the past activities that TAG has been involved with, from a going around the state and learning about the technology community perspective. You may be familiar with the fact that this past summer and fall, TAG, in conjunction with the General Assembly, held a number of meetings around the state where they engaged the technology community and tried to determine ways that they can help grow that community here in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Another study commission passed. This one is Senate only, but they expect to meet during the summer and fall, and they're going to do similar in that they're going to go around and meet with various folks around the state to see what we can do from an economic development perspective to grow the technology community here in Georgia. So I would just say, now that the session's wound down, we're not done. We have to continue our efforts and to just be on the lookout for those opportunities to engage with the legislative members.
Well, another election cycle, and I'm going to say that based on knowing your professionalism, you're not going to cite any what we'll call warriors that are out there that are pure tech evangelists. I know that all of them are operating certainly in the greater good of economic growth. Yeah. But I think a lot of our listeners need to remember and pay attention to some of the platforms and some of the things that have been done either in the past assembly or being talked about during these election cycles to be sure to support the kind of candidates that will continue the movement.
Yeah, and Frank, to be honest with you, I don't mind pointing out a few that have been very beneficial to us, particularly this past legislative session. And as you mentioned, this is an election year. All 180 House members and all 56 Senate members are up for re-election, and it's going to be somewhat of a unique year in that every 10 years, as you know, following the census, we do redistricting, and we have done that. And so some of the districts have changed quite significantly, and some of our friends in the General Assembly are going to be facing opposition that they have not faced in past years. There are several that have been particularly helpful and that actually have technology backgrounds, and those are Senator John Albers.
I was going to mention. Yeah. And again, I'm sensitive to your political, and I mean professional political positioning and what you need to do every day, so I didn't want to put you on the spot, and yet I know that some of these, and especially Senator John is actually my representative. We're out of Roswell, so we know his work in the Roswell-Alpharetta area, and again, even as I mentioned earlier, tying in with not only the efforts that he put into the Assembly, but what he's doing with the Chamber and with the city of Alpharetta in terms of their aggressive posturing. So, but I think it is important. Please continue, because that's exactly the point I was hoping to make, and that is that there are some people that we need to pay attention to that potentially are going to need our support. So please continue. You mentioned John Albers.
Well, sure. Representative Mike Dudgeon is another one. He's from Lower Forsyth County, and he actually works for a game developer here in Atlanta, and is a technology engineer by trade, and he's really been able to kind of bring a good technical perspective to the General Assembly the last couple of years. And the other one that has been tremendously helpful is Senator Barry Loudermilk, who is from the Rome-Cartersville area. And Barry actually has a technology consulting services company that does quite a bit of business in that part of the state. And all three of those individuals have really been helpful to the community, and it's been nice to have a technical perspective in the legislature. They've been just tremendously helpful.
We talked about dynamic fluidity and trying to describe the explosion that goes on in technology and how to keep a generalist, someone like an elected official who's coming at it, some cases maybe from an industry perspective. Most times, even if they're coming at it from an industry perspective, it's hard to keep up with all the insane changes and radical new disruptive technologies that are happening. So I think your point's well taken. It's good to have, if you will, almost captured generals or friends that are in the actual rooms where the discussions are going on that have some sense and understand, some sense in terms of the overall subject, and have an educated position to be able to share with their associates. I think that's obviously part of the progress that's going on. You got to love the fact that places like Rome and even North Georgia are beginning to play such a role when for many years, and again I mentioned before some cities, but Augusta and Athens and Columbus, Savannah, of course, and now this whole I'm very intrigued by the North Georgia Network. I think what those guys did up there in terms of the collaboration between Dawson and Lumpkin and White to begin with, the three counties that are up there, that ultimately led to something like 22 counties that ended up raising, ballparking now I'm thinking, but certainly over $50 million to build broadband infrastructure across some 22 counties up there. All of that's going to bode well for the economic development in the future, especially rural economic development.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct.
Well, once again, it's been as we have mentioned a couple of times, a challenging session. I think they're all kind of challenging to a degree. Every year things get more dynamic, more complicated, bigger populations. Do more with less has been the challenge certainly for the last couple of sessions. But once again, Brandon, the work that you're doing, not only with TAG, but what you do with your organization itself, has been instrumental in making a lot of these things happen, either by educating or communicating or doing both as far as the industry and the elected officials are concerned. So certainly a shout-out to you and to your organization, and a special thank you not only for the time you take to do the work you do, but for the time you take to share it with us here on Tech Talk each session.
Thank you, Frank. I'm glad to spend time with you today.